Bezos Hashem Yisparach, Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Parashat Teztaveh, Nastov Shir Pei Beis. In this week's parasha, it talks about the begodim of the Kohen Gadol, the Kohanim, how they served in the Beis Hamikdash, what garments they had to wear. And then, towards the end of the parasha, we had to build a mizbeach. A mizbeach not for the animals, be maktir animals, but rather it's to be maktir besomim. The reach haktoires of the besomim were offered on this mizbeach called the mizbeach haktoires. And the Gemara in Yuma describes 2 points, especially we're going to discuss these 2 points on the inyan of the ktoires. Omar Rabbi Baba Chono, the Gemara is in Yuma, Daf Lamed Tes Amud Beis. Izim Shebe Yerichoi. Yerichoi, we know, was a city outside Yerushalayim, further away. And the Izim, the goats that were in Yerichoi, they would be sneezing from the smell of the Ktoires, which spread not only in the Beis HaMikdash, not only in Yerushalayim, but even reached Yerichoi. And it was so strong that the goats in Yerichoi used to sneeze because of the smell of the Ktoires. And as well, the Gemara continues, Noshim shebi Yerichoi, the women in Yerichoi, Einon srichois lespasim. They never needed to put on perfume because of the Reach HaKtoires. We can learn from this a great lesson, because as we know, Tikoin tfilosi k'ktoires lefonecho. Our davening is represented like the Ktoires. And like the Ktoires spreads not only in the Beis HaMikdash and Yerushalayim, and it can even spread till Yerichoi, which in Yerichoi the goats were sneezing from the perfume, or from the smell of the Ktoires. And the same to the women, didn't have to wear any perfume because the Ktoires was so strong even in Yerichoi. So I'd like to share with you the following story. There was a man called Rabbi Rodin. He came from America to Israel to learn Torah until he got smicha to become a Rav, and he decided he's going to move back to America. But he's not going to move back to New York, to Brooklyn, to Flatbush, to Borough Park. He's going to move back to a city which you would call is a spiritual desert, somewhere where there are no shuls, there are no rabbis. And since he learned so much Torah and he knows halacha, he's going to spread Torah in places where they don't have access to rabbonim and they don't have access to knowledge of Torah. And he will come and teach them Torah and teach them halacha. So he left Eretz Yisrael and he reached Texas. In Texas, this was at the time, there was no religious schools or shuls, and he said, I'm going to go to Texas and there I will try to be a rabbi and start a religious community. So when he arrived in Texas, but as we all know, ambitions is one thing, but having a budget is something else. So this holy Reb David Rodin arrived in Texas, but he didn't have any budget with what to pay to have a shul. So he rented such a room as a shul, a room. And he tried to bring in members to join his shul. But of course, the competition, he was no match. There were plenty of there was even reformed temples, and there was very, very modern synagogues, and there people weren't interested, they weren't attracted to come to this new rabbi, the new shul, especially that he shows in such a primitive manner. But then one day a man walks in and says, are you the rabbi of this shul here? He said, yes. He said, I want to ask you, this is your shul? He says, yes. This isn't for your shul. Come outside. Took him outside. Said, you see this shul further down the road? That shul I'm going to rent for you. He says, wow, but it's a huge shul. There's 800 seats. How am I going to fill this shul up? So he said, I'm going to come, I'm going to bring my families with me, my uncles, my cousins, even my work partners, my business partners. I'm going to bring them all to the shul. It's going to be full. You're going to see it'll be a beautiful community. And that's exactly what happened. They rented that beautiful big shul. This Rabbi David, he was the rabbi of the shul, and people just were coming. And he gave Shirei Torah, teaching them halacha. And slowly only he built a religious school for the boys, a religious school for the girls, and there was even a cheder and a yeshiva ktana for the boys. A beautiful community grew in Texas at the time. And then one day, Reb David asked this man, what caused you to come into my shul then and to turn this into such a community? You're the pillar of the community. What promoted you? What caused you to come and to make such a change and to bring such a change to Texas? So he said, I was in Yerushalayim. I was in Yerushalayim by the Koisla Marovi. I went to visit Israel and I was davening by the Koisla Marovi. And next to me stood a man who he was davening in a way. It's so sweet, such a holiness, how he was davening. And I was listening to his tefillahs. And he was saying, Baruch Shoma v'oyu oilam, Ashrei yoshvi v'secho oid, Aluchos elo, Hallelujah, Hallelujah Hashem kol goyim, Shabchu kol, and davening so beautifully that I said in the whole of Texas, I never heard somebody davening so authentic. So I wanted to turn to him and give him some money. But I said, so respectful just to give money to somebody. He didn't ask me for money. But I said a promise. I'm going to return to Texas. And if I'm going to find somebody who he davens as so authentic like this man who I just saw by the Koisla Marovi, he is going to be my rabbi. So when I came back to Texas, I started to ask people, do you know somebody really religious? Jew said, just somebody just arrived in Texas from Israel. Hey, and they gave me your address. And when I saw you, I said, you look just like, you're just that same, like that man I saw by the Koisla Marovi. And therefore I said, you're going to be my rabbi. And I wasn't wrong. Look how you grew, look how you built and you made such a beautiful community. Look how you taught us Torah and Halacha. This was the best decision I ever made. Said the Holy Reb David, I don't know who that man by the Koisla Marovi is. I don't know what his name is. But I know one thing. After 120 years old, he's going to come to Shomayim and stand in front of the Kisei HaKovod. And there the Ribbono Shel Olam will tell him, you know you built shuls in Texas, you built schools in Texas, you built a beautiful community. And he's going to look, says Ribbono Shel Olam, I don't even know where Texas is in the map. I've never left Israel in my whole life. How can I have reward for a community I never built? And they're going to tell him, man heilige Yid, man teire Yid. Your tefillah by the Koisla Marovi spread and impact all the way to Texas. You were able to impact. And the impact was so great that you would build schools and yeshivas and a beautiful community. So you deserve the reward in the Olam Oemes. We see from here that when a person davens, the beauty of davening, the mesikas of davening is not only your own personal avodas Hashem. It affects the whole shul that you are in. When you come on time, you sit on your place, you don't speak, and you mitzaref with a minyan, you daven beautifully. People see, they take respect. It has an impact, and you can change people's lives because the Ktoires wasn't only in the Beis HaMikdash. The Ktoires and the beauty of the Ktoires spread all the way to Yericho, had the effect of the Ktoires. The same too when we daven, we should always take care that our davening should bring a Kiddush Hashem. Wherever we daven, it should be a Kiddush Hashem by the people to see the respect you show when you daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Gemara says one more point. The Gemara said another thing. Omar Reb Yeshua ben Korcha, he said that Sochli Zokein Echot, an elderly man once told me that Pamachas holachti le Shiloh. Shiloh was a town in Eretz Yisrael, and the Mishkan was built in Shiloh after Yeshua came over to Eretz Yisrael. He led the Jewish nation into Israel. So 7 years they had to conquer Israel. 7 years they divided Israel. That's 14 years. After 14 years, then they built Mishkan Shiloh, which lasted for over 350 years until Shlomo built the first Beis HaMikdash. We have an idea when Shiloh was. Now, This elderly man was telling Rabbi Akiva. When was this Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva was about 50 years after the Churban Beis HaMikdash Hasheni. So we're talking a difference of time. Shiloi, from the Mishkan Shiloi, all the way Beis HaMikdash Harishon, Golus Povel, coming back, Beis HaMikdash Hasheni, till the times of Rabbi Akiva, till the times of Rabbi Yeshua ben Kocha, which he lived in the times of Rabbi Akiva, then it took about 1,000 years. So let's have a look what happened when they walked along the roads of Shiloi. He says, Pamachas olachti le Shiloi, I walked along the town Shiloi, vorachti reach ketoires bibein kosoleo. I still was able to smell the ketoires. The effect, the smell of the ketoires was still on the stones of the buildings of Shiloi. 1,000 years elapsed. 1,000 years passed from Mishkan Shiloi till the times of Rabbi Yeshua ben Kocha, which was around 50 years after the second Beis HaMikdash. And yet the smell, the beautiful perfume of the Ktoires was able to be smelt on the stones of the buildings of Shiloi. Moirav Rabbi, so we hear from here, beautiful. Every tefillah that we daven, every tefillah that we pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have to know it's not just an effect for today's mincha. It's not just for today's shachris, but the power of the tefillah can have an impact and an effect as hundreds, as thousands of years later for generations to come through your tefillah. There's a beautiful story of the holy Reb Fisher Schechter from America said, when he was a Rebbe in Cheder, you know the Rebbes in Cheders, then they have the Agoda Shel Pesach, which they worked for about 2 months before Pesach. They're working on preparing, writing, and coloring in, filling up the Agoda Shel Pesach. The children should come home, Agoda Shel Pesach, beautiful Agoda, like a book. And when it was all ready, the holy Reb Fisher Schechter, he went upstairs to the office of the Menahel, and he asked him, is it possible, can I print the Agoda Shel Pesach? So he said, no problem, you can come and you can, I have to go out, you know how to press print. He said, yeah, sure. So he takes a computer, puts in the USB, here's Agoda Shel Pesach, and he presses print. Nothing, he doesn't hear any print. What do? You press print, 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 and again print, and again print, and again print, and you print, print. Nothing, what's going, he looks around, and again he continues, print, print. And he's pressing it and pressing it. And then the secretary from the 2 floors down comes running up and says, Reb Fisher, please stop pressing print. Our offices are behind. The office of the school is full, flooded with Agoda Shel Pesach. Because the printer is not next to the computer. The printer is 2 floors down in the secretary's office. This Reb Fisher Schechter said is a lesson in life. When we daven over here in the shul, we say a perek tehillim. We are printing Yeshuas, but where is the printer in Shomayim? The printer is in Shomayim. The Ribbono Shel Olam is taking your tefillah, your perek tehillim that you said, and he's keeping it. He's looking after it. He's safeguarding it. Every tefillah that you say, you printed a Yeshua, and this Yeshua you are able one day that when the person needs these Yeshuas, Hashem will then take your special tefillah and use it in order to help yourself, future generations. And that's what we daven, we say that at HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we say that Hashem should keep our tefillahs. Simo de mosi benoit choliyois. The tears that we daven, put it in a flask. Look after the tears. Look after our tefillahs. Hashem, we print with our tefillahs in Shomayim. And Hashem keeps every tear in this special flask. And sometimes He takes one tear and He says, this einikel needs a refuah. I'm now going to take the tear and bring him a refuah shlema. This child needs a zivug. I'm going to take that tear that you may have davened many years earlier, or your grandparents davened many years earlier, and he's now taking the tear out of this precious flask, and he's taking to bring a Yeshua zivugim, refuahs, and parnosas for future generations, because like the smell of the ktoires is not only on the day when you bring the ktoires, the smell of the ktoires can exist thousands of years later, even in Shiloh, in the times of Rabbi Akiva, after second Churban, the whole tefillah that they daven then can be even till now is still alive. And this is the greatest that we have, and we daven and we cry to Hashem. Hashem keeps the tefillahs. And this I'd like to end with a beautiful mashal for a Birnzweig. He says as follows. There was once a king who had a big problem in his country. The ocean used to run into the river, and the river went across the country. The problem is that the river used to rise up and flood, because the waters of the ocean would flow into the river, and so much water would flood his entire country. So what did he do? He ordered these huge, big metal doors, and he took these doors and he sealed the sea from the river like this. They will not enter the waters and flood his country. But then when the king returned, he paid attention. They said, what's happening? The whole country is being flooded again. And he saw that the doors, they're eroded. They're not worth anything. They crumbled. So he called up the company. He said, I bought from you the most strongest, the thickest metal doors to close and seal the sea from flooding my country. And that's why he did. And the doors aren't worth anything. Said, water of the sea has salt in it, and the salt can rust and can eat away at the metal. My metal doors for ordinary water, but when these waters of the sea, that rusts and eats away, and that's why it could not hold out against the waters of the sea. This is a lesson for us. The lesson for us is that the water that we cry, the Demaot is salt water. And it says, Sharei Demois Loinenalu. When the Shorim in Shomayim, Shorim which are close, Shari Panusa, Shari Brias, and Shorim, which we need Yeshuas. But it can withhold everything, but it cannot withhold the Ma'ot. Because the Ma'ot, the tears, has got salty water, and the salty water will eat away and break these Shorim and bring Yeshuas to Am Yisrael. So when we learn about the Ketores, we learn about the Mishkan, we can learn from it for ourselves. That the Ketores, our tefillas, Tikkun Tefilosik Ketores Lefonecho, our tefillas is the most beautiful perfume that spreads out, and it spreads the Kiddush Hashem in the shuls, and it can spread even till Texas, and as well as the lasting effect of the tefillas. The lasting effect can be for generations, and Be'ezras Hashem, may we zoicha to see all our tefillas answered, and may we all have a beautiful Shabbos Shulman Avoirah.